Imagine if a 12-year-old influencer convinced 30,000 kids to leave their homes, walk across an entire continent, and climb the Alps with no food or shoes, all because he had a vision. Today, we'd call it a cult. In 1212, they call it the Children's Crusade. But while the kids thought they were going to be heroes, the adults in the room were already planning how to sell them into slavery. This is the dark, unfiltered truth about the most delusional moment in human history. To understand how 30,000 children were tricked into death march, you have to understand the world they lived. It was 1212, the Fourth Crusade had just ended, and it was an absolute embarrassment. The professional knights, the guys in the shiny armor, hadn't even made it to the Holy Land. Instead, they got distracted, sacked the Christian city of Constantinople, and came home with pockets full of looted gold. The public was disgusted. They felt the adults had failed because they were greedy and sinful. A narrative started spreading through the villages. If the powerful can't do it, the pure will. People started believing that God didn't want swords. He wanted innocence. They believed the walls of Jerusalem would literally crumble at the sight of a child's prayer. It was the ultimate underdog story, and it was the perfect environment for a charismatic leader to seize the spotlight. In France, we have Stephen of Cloyes. He was a shepherd boy who claimed Jesus visited him in the form of a beggar and gave him a letter for the king. Stephen wasn't just a kid. He was a performer. He traveled from town to town, his voice booming, promising a miracle. He built a following of 30,000 people almost overnight. Meanwhile, in Germany, Nicholas of Cologne was running the same script. His hook, he told his followers they wouldn't even need ships. He promised that once they reached the Mediterranean Sea, the water would dry up, just like the Red Sea in the Bible, and they would walk straight to Jerusalem on a dry land. Parents were actually encouraging their kids to go. They thought they were sending them to be saints. In reality, they were sending them into a logistical nightmare that no one, not even the kids leading it, was prepared for. Nicholas's group of 20,000 Germans had to cross the Alps to reach the sea. Think about the physics of that for a second. These kids didn't have North Face jackets. They didn't have hiking boots. Most were in linen tunics and wooden clogs, if they had shoes at all. They had no supply wagons, no stored grains, and no tents. As they climbed into the freezing peaks, the miracle began to look like a massacre. Every morning, dozens of children simply didn't wake up. They died of hypothermia in their sleep. They died of starvation. They fell off cliffs in the fog. The local villagers in the mountains didn't see them as holy pilgrims. They saw them as a swarm of starving locusts. They hid their food. They closed their doors. By the time Nicholas reached the plains of Italy, only about 7,000 of his 20,000 followers were still alive. And then came the moment of truth. Nicholas stood at the edge of the sea in Genoa. The survivors held their breath, waiting for the water to part. Nothing happened. The ocean didn't care about their faith. The miracle was a lie. The group collapsed. Some stayed in Italy to become beggars or servants. Nicholas's own father was later trapped down and hanged by the angry parents of the children who never came home. But the French children, their story is actually worse. Stephen and his followers reached the ports of Marseille. They didn't expect the sea to part. They were looking for a ride, And that's when they met two merchants, Hugh the Iron and William the Pig. These men offered the children 7 ships. They said they would take them to the Holy Land for the glory of God. It seemed like a miracle. The kids cheered, boarded the ships, and sailed into the horizon. They were not seen again for 18 years. In 1230, a priest who had been on those ships finally escaped and returned to Europe. He revealed a dark truth. 2 of the ships had crashed in a storm, killing everyone on board. But the other 5, they never went to Jerusalem. Hugh and William had cut a deal with Saracen slave traders in North Africa. The children weren't crusaders. They were cargo. They were offloaded in Algeria and Egypt and sold. Thousands of them spent their lives in the kitchens and fields of Middle East, victims of a holy scam, orchestrated by 2 men who saw an opportunity in the madness. For centuries, we call this the Children's Crusade, but modern historians have found one last twist. The word used in the old texts were puri, which means boys. It was also used for the powerless, the beggars, the landless, and the outcasts. This might not just have been an army of kids. It was an army of the forgotten. People so desperate for a better life that they were willing to believe a 12-year-old with a good story. Whether they were children or just a desperate poor, the lesson remains the same. When people lose faith in their institutions, they look for a prophet. And history shows us that for every prophet with a vision, there are 2 merchants waiting in the shadows to sell that vision for a profit.